Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation's Conversations at Home program. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. And now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce actor Emmy Rossum from ANGELYNE. Hi, Emmy. Congratulations on your incredible work. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And of course. And I know that this project has been long gestating and you worked so hard on it. How does it feel to have it out in the world?
Oh, it's good. It's good. And it's also sad because I feel like it's been the thing that has like completely kept me going for so many years and that I care so much about, and feels like it's been gestating in me since I was 13. So, over 2 decades coming, like 4.5 years of consistent work on it. So it's really nice. And, once you put something out into the world, it doesn't belong to you anymore. So it's wonderful to have that and to share that. And I hope that, people fall in love with this icon and this person as much as I have.
Well, and speaking of that, obviously the story was written by my former colleague, Gary Baum from The Hollywood Reporter. It's very exciting. But as you just mentioned, your awareness of ANGELYNE started when you were 13. Tell me what it was like to be a 13-year-old girl and see her image around LA. And how did that make you feel when you first saw her?
The first time I discovered ANGELYNE was probably a lot like a lot of other Angelinos through the window. Through the window of a car. I was driving in a rental car with my mom, auditioning in my first pilot season. I'm sure invariably for some sitcom that I didn't get, even though I'd tested 5 times for it, probably didn't get it. I looked up out of the car window one day and I saw this billboard and was so struck by this image of it was almost like overdosing on woman. There's it's blonde hair and breasts and small waist and hips and mystery and glamour and punk princess, Barbie doll, Tinkerbell. Hard to kind of explain what it is. It's just an explosion of attention. And her name in this kind of seductive cursive, ANGELYNE, and then management and a phone number. And I just thought, whoa, that's certainly nothing like me when I was 12 or 13, not understanding my femininity or my womanhood at all, certainly not understanding its power. And I was so taken by this image. And then it's almost like once you see it, you're seeing it everywhere. Right. And I started to see the billboards everywhere. And I would ask people who is this woman, ANGELYNE? And everyone would have the first initial reaction of lighting up. And then they would tell you a completely different story about it. And it was so fascinating to me, how could you be so known and yet so unknown at the same time? And so it wasn't until my 20s when you would hear stories of so-and-so saw her on the 405, you make a wish when you see her car, there's some rich sheik who's paying for the billboards. Oh, there's not actually just one ANGELYNE, there are 12 of them. You could rent them for a party. They switch them out every year. She's from Ohio. She's from space. Just bizarre things that I just but she really is this breath of hot pink and car engine. And there's a real ferocity about her kind of front-footed sexuality that I thought was so interesting. And so it wasn't until 2017 when The Hollywood Reporter released an article claiming to have finally cracked the mystery of, her original identity, that a much kind of more poignant and nuanced story seemed to emerge. Right. That she quickly kind of went out of her way to challenge, not specifically refute, but kind of unwilling to let someone co-opt or own her narrative.
She was not forthcoming at all with either claiming the veracity of the piece or substantiating it for the writer.
No, she said they got a lot wrong, but she wasn't going to say what. And that was one of the most brilliant things is throughout the years, contrary to a lot of kind of influencers and celebrities today who she kind of preceded, she knows that the rumor mill kind of furthers her aims of fame and getting attention and the love of the world. And so she's never, wanted to kind of give one succinct narrative of who she is, what she represents. And it's kind of she discusses herself as a Rorschach test. What you see, that's good for you. And then that says more about you than it does about me. For me, I saw a trailblazing woman who was way ahead of her time, who was empowered in her sexuality, and who must have had some kind of sorrow in her past to have raged so vehemently against negativity and pain, to have kind of seeked to make herself this kind of plasticized, completely invulnerable, beautiful at all times, ageless rebel of female sexuality and kind of this goddess. And it was interesting to me to posit a lot of theories about, what that pain might have been. But ultimately, the show isn't really a biopic. It's more of an exploration of her fame and of all of the various people that have tried to co-opt her story and tell her story. And ultimately kind of looking back at ourselves as the storytellers, being like, and we're one of them. That's what's so interesting about her. You can never tell someone else's story. It's kind of about the failure of biopics in and of itself.
Right. And also, she can't tell her story unless we're willing to listen. And she has this very engaged audience, and she's a master at manipulating the audience, right? Because she knows exactly where to place the billboard, specifically men, as we see in the show. She speaks frequently of, oh, they're so easy to manipulate. And she really rode that train to a degree that left everyone's head spinning. So it's pretty brilliant.
Well, also at the time in which she really rose to power, I mean, the patriarchy was even more in control than it is now. So I think that she knew she was playing to that audience, and that those people were the gatekeepers, and she was going to figure out in a non-sexual way how to kind of control the energy in the room and use it to her advantage. And she knew that everyone underestimated her based on how she looked.
Of course. And that was so brilliant of her to know that, right?
Yeah.
So take me back to 2018 when you left Shameless, your amazing long-running role as Tiona. Sad day for all of us when you left the show. Tell me about why this project felt like the next dream step for you as an artist in wanting to be a producer and being more in control over this whole package. And how did becoming Angelyne satisfy something in you that you'd been craving?
Well, I think, as an actor and as somebody that I'm really a junkie for experiences and something that feels like Everest. And this really felt like Everest. I think to me, the idea of aging in both directions, about playing something that looked, sounded, walked, thought nothing like me, was pretty addictive. But also there was something inside of it that felt so familiar. There was a kernel in The Hollywood Reporter about her original identity and its relation to Judaism and the Holocaust. And myself a Jew, and that part of my identity being something that as has at moments been frightening to own because of all of the threats that can come with that I have experienced very, really, very firsthand. It's funny that she says she's a Rorschach test, and the thing that we see that we find poignant or moving about the story, it says more about us, because that part certainly spoke to me, and it does say something about me. And I think the way in which she's reinvented herself, the way in which she's found strength from vulnerability, and the way in which she inspires people, I think she kind of did pull herself out of something, and that was her own Everest. And so I think there was something it was so kind of just magnetic, the idea of doing this for me. And I just was completely obsessed. I just could think of doing nothing else and would stop at nothing to achieve it. And then of course the second Everest was getting her to give her blessing.
Right. So walk me through that interaction, because I know it was, as the Hollywood Reporter article suggested too, she's a cagey person, was not very forthcoming. Tell me about your interactions with her, and where did you ultimately land with her either blessing or not blessing the project?
Well, she's a rebel, and she's very, very unpredictable. It took a long time to set the meeting. And ultimately, it was before we got the green light. It was when we were still kind of trying to figure out what exactly the story would be. And, you know, I had listened to all of her meditation tapes and read every interview and had like accessed archive footage of her and watched everything. And it was really important to me to have her blessing. And ultimately we met at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel.
Good place to meet, right off of the Walk of Fame.
And we had a very, very long dinner. And she walked in and she was very much in control. Her first words to me were, "So why do you have such a hard on to play me?" And that was after she had kind of shaken out the napkin and put it down and sat on it and was in like a very kind of beautiful and very controlled kind of posture and pose. Sure. She's really incredible posture.
So was she very guarded from your perspective? Did she seem kind of nervous, or what was her demeanor?
No, she doesn't seem nervous. Okay. I don't know if she's ever nervous.
Okay.
At least not on the outside. Mm-hmm. She seemed to know like she had all the cards and she knew what she wanted out of the exchange. And, you know, I wanted her to know how deeply moved I am by her and what she's achieved, and how I really truly believe that she is the precursor to where we are in society and fame hunger now, and influencer culture, and how she is kind of the OG prototype for being a celebrity, Right.
And an influencer is the word we would now use. Right.
You know, she wanted to know what parts of the story I was interested in. And I said, all of them, all of the stories, not giving one more or less weight. And ultimately, that I truly believed that it was not going to be a biopic, that only she could tell her story. And, you know, she had been in the process of starting to make her documentary back then and is still kind of finishing it now. And ultimately we came to, you know, I think love each other in that meeting, and ordered everything on the menu and Alan Watts and Eckhart Tolle and different philosophies. And I think I could quote her to her. I think wow. She like, wow, this girl is, you know,
she was probably very, very struck by how well you knew her and everything about her, I imagine.
Well, I think she was just, I think I had a lot of skin in the game. And I think like I think I was very nervous to meet her, you know, having her approval and was really, really so important to me. And so after she met with me, she met with our director and showrunner, and she gave input. There were things in the story she didn't want in there. And we stayed away from those. Names and dates were changed at her request. And ultimately, while we toyed with the idea of different credits for her, we allowed her to be credited as she wanted. And ultimately, I think, you know, she didn't want an EP credit. She really feels like this is our version of the story and it's not her story. And we totally agree. And our show is kind of like a fantasy tribute to the punk rock princess and, you know, what her origin stories may or may not be.
I like that. So you kind of landed in a fair space of she was sort of giving you artistic license, but then keeping herself out of it ultimately.
Yeah. And I think that felt right to her. And it was like with her, it's always like an ever evolving conversation. She doesn't kind of do things the way that through normal channels or the way things would normally go. And she's a rebel. She's going to write her own rules. She's going to change the rules. And I think you have to respect that. She's very authentically in her position and she does what she wants.
I love that. And I love that even after all these years, she still has such ownership and such agency over herself.
She also said I could have done deals with Coke, with Pepsi, with this one, with that one throughout the years. And I didn't do Playboy. I didn't do this one. And I'm going to do this because I have a good feeling about you. And this is how it's feeling to me. And yeah. And so ultimately, and she did it according to what felt right to her.
I love that instinct. It seems that's been driving her all along.
Yeah. And I think, you know, ultimately we are probably just the next iteration of fantastical story that will be told about her. And ultimately, the dissection of fame and how all these things kind of work together to form this narrative, and how fame itself is kind of like a tumbleweed that gets like crowdsourced almost.
That's very interesting concept. Mm-hmm.
We're also like, we're fascinated not only by the stuff in the Hollywood Reporter, but by the art that she's painted of herself and of aliens and of things we read on subreddits about her, of people who had interactions with her, about people that were obsessed with her. I think that, ultimately like wanting to not let the Hollywood Reporter's narrative be the final word and ultimately return a lot of the mystery and the power back to her through this.
That's so interesting. So many layers to parse.
Yeah, That's a lot of years of my life there.
I love it. And during COVID too, no less, Emmy, you must have had a lot of brain activity going on in the last 2 years. Yeah. So speaking of Hollywood Reporter, you did a lovely piece recently where you said the following, which I just love. You said, "I found it completely liberating to look in the mirror and not see myself at all." And you said it was unnerving, but that feeling it gives way to this real liberation from myself and the hangups that can impede a performance. And it made me wonder, what were the hangups that you had experienced previous to this that you felt unencumbered by this time? Like, did you actually feel more free, even though you had this literal costume on, all this heavy weight on you? That created more of a liberal feeling. That's really interesting.
I think, much earlier on in my career, I felt that my role in things sometimes was to look a certain way, in a certain light, and to not do this or that with your face, or be a certain thing. And I think, with the roles that I started to take in my, 20s, I started to feel less wed to that idea and much more liberated from that. And that wasn't an idea I ever conceived, but sometimes when you become part of the machine, those things are asked of you. And ultimately, as a people pleaser, I, understood my role in those things. And I think for me to feel real liberation through the role in Shameless, which, I had the opposite issue there. Like no hair, no makeup, camera 2 inches from your face with all of your blemishes and cellulite at moments. And it was really liberating to be, to have no artifice in that. But still, at some moments in that character, I felt that there were things that were very close to me, and it looks like me. So when I'm doing things that are scary or ugly or angry or visceral, it still feels like it's me doing it. And there are
didn't have that physical separation of having the hair and the makeup, which maybe provided like a shield of sorts.
I think in a way it allowed me to escape from myself, and really transport and become something other than myself. And in that, I did not feel that I was doing a voice or doing a walk or doing a bunch of different things. I felt that when I put that on, all of those things became just my modalities of expression. And they felt very real and very natural to me in a way that probably 10,000 hours of working on it.
Right. This isn't an accident. You probably worked really hard on all of that.
I did, but ultimately you're in theory, when you've not experienced prosthetics, nervous that they will impede you in some way. And then it's almost like that was my superhero outfit, and I could find my speed through that, with a little bit of that extra help. And the artists are so incredible that do that work. They are really painting you and sculpting you like you're the Sistine Chapel.
How long did it take to get in costume with the prosthetics every day?
For the contemporary day look, it was 7 hours every morning before I would go on set. So some mornings I would get picked up at 1:30 or 2 a.m. to be on set at 9 a.m. There was never a moment. I was never on set at 7 a.m. That just
my God. Were you able to sleep while they were doing your work? Could you close your eyes at all?
No, but it
Oh
just
my God.
became this process where it was just a really long time for me to kind of slowly begin this process of vocal warm-ups and mannerism reminding. And also because I play her at so many different eras and ages, remembering like, okay, which voice am I in today? Which vocal pattern?
Right.
Like how high are my shoulders? How tight is my rib cage? How much, scar tissue might I be carrying at this moment? I think it's really, really interesting.
Wow. That must have been like continuity wise, a lot to manage.
Yeah. I had these, in my trailer, I had kind of white printer paper posted out of like every era and like what the kind of physical cues were to get into it. Before I would go to set. And I had like a fun list of words, to work on, like, I don't remember. Yeah, I can't even remember what they were.
Probably feels like a fever dream at this point, right?
Yeah.
So there's been such an interesting
popular people are pink and empowered was one of them. Popular people are pink and empowered. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's totally really fun.
I also love the voice. It's like this wonderful combination of Marilyn Monroe and Betty Boop.
Yeah, it is. And it's got all these like weird kind of shadow voices that are like punctuation. Everything kind of has a flourish or but in that there's also like modalities of a way to like control the room or make it seem like you're maybe like clueless or really kind of nail someone in or hypnotize them. It's almost as if like there's an addiction to at least for me within my version of the character, there's like a real kind of calming and inner center and control that's found through the resonance of that.
Interesting. And also you being an amazing singer probably helped you get into the voice even more.
Yeah, that's kind of always my first way in. I know that a lot of people work with physicality, but for me, it's always been through the voice and how the cadence. I always kind of think like the movement is a dance to the sound of your own voice. And in that way, it kind of feels musical. And so I often find the music of the voice through the walk or the walk through the music of the voice.
Wow. That's fascinating. And then there's a great scene where she's singing and she's not what we would call a great singer or a great vocalist, but I was wondering how difficult it was for you to be singing as her, but she's not a great vocalist. So you were probably having to like remove your own skills from that. How hard was that?
Well, it's really interesting because she also, I think she's a good singer. I think that she has this kind of like rebel backbeat, slightly off cadence. Or you're like, is that weird timing or is that a choice? It's really interesting. Like not this kind of like rebellious thing. And this power in not trying, but also trying. It was a tricky balance to find. And I actually worked with an opera teacher to find some of the more like shadow tones, which are a different part of your kind of head voice than I've ever knew that I had. And it's weird because they're very childlike. He said like little babies have these tones when they're born. And it's so weird because I hear my daughter.
Oh, wow.
Like doing these
so funny
doing these weird sounds. And I'm like, oh, those exist within all of us. She's coloring with all the colors.
It's like guttural, but also just like very shriekish. And it's very almost like infantile where she's learning how to make noise as a human, like almost in real time,
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like this alien Barbarella space noise. Yeah.
With like a dash of like Linda Ramone and Riot Girls from the early 90s. There's just
Blondie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really yeah.
So my last question centers on something that's been fascinating to me as of late, which is there's such a spate of fascinating characters, mostly true story limited series. We have Anna Delvey from Inventing Anna, Elizabeth Holmes from The Dropout, these sort of mysterious women who have courted fame in different ways. And there's such a tendency, I think, on the part of the audience member to apply a psychological profile on people whose behavior we don't understand or they're too enigmatic for us. How much of that played into your approach, if at all, if you're trying to figure out, is this woman well? does she have a condition? Has she been diagnosed with something? Or is she just purely this fascinating personality that we've never encountered before? How are you balancing that?
I think the joy and liberation in our version of this, which is maybe different than the other two, is that we're not trying to hone in on one specific Angelyne. Our story is told through so many people's perspective, and as we whiplash kind of between perspectives, Angelyne and the man du jour who's trying to co-opt her narrative. We're kind of seeing different versions of her. So for me, it was really interesting to play for the audience the different versions of her, and also kind of to fill in the blank with, to use the bits of information that we do have to kind of create the kind of much younger 17-year-old version of who she may have been, what her voice and walk and presence might have been like, kind of as she's starting to reach and yearn for the pink and for the body. Who was that woman? So for me, the tenderness in finding the much younger one was the most challenging, because it was the one I had to imagine the most about. And had to use all of the kind of information I have about after, and just still photographic images of her before, to kind of go, what's the connective tissue here? How does that body walk? How does that body that then becomes that body? How does that walk? How does that talk? How does that feel? And what is that? How can I make myself feel that?
That's really interesting.
And please, makeup artist, can you make me look 17?
They did a fantastic job, I must say.
Involved in some PVC piping.
And this was after you had your child?
Yeah. It was 3 months after I had my baby.
Wow. What artists do for their craft is truly stunning.
I had to stop nursing because the prosthetics were glued to me all day. And so I only nursed for 6 weeks and was like, sorry, kid, you're on your own. Here's a bottle. I got to go make this show. And these boobs are getting suffocated all day. So they're not for sale.
That's going to be a fun story to share with your daughter when she's able to understand.
I know she's eating carne asada now with no teeth. So I think she'll be okay.
Oh, I love that. And I wish we had more time, because I have so many more questions, but you've given a wonderful primer to not only all the hard work you put into this, but humanizing this person who I see in my neighborhood. I live in Hollywood. I see her driving around, and I created this 2-dimensional sense of who she is, and knowing the humanity and knowing this backstory and everything that she's been through. The next time I see her, I will feel differently.
That's cool. I think ultimately, that is kind of what I hope, is that, we realize that everyone is a person and deserves respect, and that they are human.
Yeah,
even if they don't want to be.
Even if she's trying to deny the forces of nature, bless her, right? Well, thank you so much, Emmy, for joining us. Congratulations on the show. I can't wait to see what people have to say, especially Angelyne herself, if she chooses to share her opinions.
Exactly.
Thank you.